Welcome to the sands of time, where history has left indelible footprints, the Middle East. A region often misunderstood, yet deeply significant to the world. It's a mosaic of cultures, languages, and religions, a vibrant tapestry woven over millennia. Geographically, the Middle East is a crossroads, a bridge between Africa, Asia, and Europe. It is a land of contrasts, featuring arid deserts, fertile river valleys, rugged mountains, and coastal plains. It has been a cradle of civilization, nurturing the earliest human societies, and it has borne witness to the rise and fall of empires. Culturally, the Middle East is a melting pot. It's home to a diverse array of peoples, each with their own distinct traditions, dialects, and customs. From the bustling souks of Marrakesh to the ancient ruins of Persepolis, from the skyscrapers of Dubai to the olive groves of Lebanon, it's a place where the old and the new exist side by side. Historically, the Middle East has been a stage for some of the world's most transformative events. It's where the first cities were built, where writing was invented, where monotheism was born. It's been a battleground for power, a hub for trade, a beacon for scholars, and a sanctuary for believers. But amid this rich diversity, there's a common thread that binds the region together. It's a thread of faith. The Middle East is the birthplace of three major world religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. These faiths have shaped the region's history, its culture, its politics, and its conflicts. In this crucible of civilizations, we now focus our lens on a conflict that has shaped and continues to shape the region's history, the Israel-Palestine conflict. Rewind to 1917, to a letter that would sow the seeds of a century-long conflict. Our journey begins with a document known as the Balfour Declaration. This was a letter penned by Arthur Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary at the time, to Lord Rothschild, a leading figure in the British Jewish community. The key message: a promise of support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. But why was such a promise made? Let's dive a little deeper. The origins of the Balfour Declaration lie in the geopolitics of the time. Britain, embroiled in the throes of World War I, was seeking support from all quarters. The promise was seen as a way to secure the backing of Jewish communities, particularly in Russia and America, for the Allied cause. The implications of this declaration were profound. On the one hand, it was seen as a beacon of hope by Jewish communities worldwide, who had long yearned for a homeland. It provided a significant boost to the Zionist movement, which sought to establish a Jewish state in Palestine. However, on the other hand, it sowed the seeds of dissent and conflict among the Arab inhabitants of Palestine, who constituted the majority population. They saw this as a threat to their rights and identity, setting the stage for a struggle that would continue for decades to come. The Balfour Declaration was a promise made in a time of war, with little regard for the complexities and realities of the situation on the ground in Palestine. It was a promise that would be realized with the establishment of the State of Israel 3 decades later, but not without a cost. The cost? A conflict that has raged on for over a century, marked by wars, uprisings, and endless negotiations. A conflict that has shaped the Middle East as we know it today, with repercussions felt across the globe. And thus, a promise made in the midst of World War I lit the fuse for a conflict that would span generations. Fast forward to the end of World War II, a time when the world was reshaping itself. The global conflict had left deep scars, and nowhere were they more apparent than in the Jewish community. The Holocaust had decimated their numbers, leading to a significant influx of Jewish immigrants seeking refuge in Palestine. This migration was not without its complications. The land of Palestine, a British mandate since World War I, was home to an Arab majority who viewed this surge of Jewish immigrants with growing unease. The newcomers, many of whom were survivors of the Holocaust, were desperate for a homeland where they could live without fear. They saw Palestine, with its historical and religious significance to Judaism, as their rightful sanctuary. On the other hand, the Arab Palestinians, who had lived there for generations, felt their land was being taken away. They feared the political dynamics would shift in favor of the Jewish immigrants, disrupting the social and economic fabric of their society. This led to a mounting tension between the two communities, sparking a series of violent clashes and riots. However, the world was not blind to this brewing conflict. The international community, still reeling from the horrors of World War II, was keen to avoid another humanitarian crisis. The Jewish plight had generated widespread sympathy, and there was a growing consensus that a Jewish homeland should be established. Yet the question remained, where? The British, unable to reconcile the conflicting claims in Palestine, decided to hand the issue over to the newly formed United Nations. The hope was that this international body could devise a solution that would be fair to both the Jewish immigrants and the Arab Palestinians. As tensions rose, the world watched and the United Nations intervened. The stage was set for the next chapter in this complex narrative, the UN's partition plan of 1947. But that's a story for another scene. 1947, the United Nations stepped in with a plan, a partition. As the world watched, the United Nations General Assembly proposed a solution to the escalating tensions in Palestine, a plan that would split the land into two states, one Arab and one Jewish. This was Resolution 181, or as it is more commonly known, the Partition Plan. The idea was to create two separate entities that would coexist side by side, each with its own political and economic systems. Jerusalem, a city of immense religious significance to both Jews and Arabs, was to be placed under international administration. The international community was divided on this plan. Many countries, particularly Western nations, supported it, seeing it as a viable solution to the Jewish refugee crisis that had escalated in the aftermath of World War II. However, several Arab and Muslim-majority nations vehemently opposed the plan, arguing it was unjust to the Palestinian Arabs, who comprised the majority of the population and owned more land. The plan was met with mixed reactions from the people it directly affected. Jewish leaders, although not fully satisfied as they had hoped for control over all of Palestine, accepted the plan as they saw it as a stepping stone towards the establishment of a Jewish state. On the other hand, the Palestinian Arabs and the surrounding Arab states rejected it outright. They saw it as a gross violation of their rights, an imposition by foreign powers that dismissed their claims to the land. Despite the deep-seated opposition, the United Nations General Assembly passed the resolution on November 29, 1947. The Jewish Agency for Palestine accepted the plan, while the Arab Higher Committee and the states of the Arab League rejected it, setting the stage for a bitter conflict. The Partition Plan of 1947 was a monumental moment in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a decision that was hoped to bring peace but instead further ignited the flames of discord. The stage was set for a clash as the sun set on the British mandate in Palestine. 1948, a new nation was born, and with it, a war. In the early hours of May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion, the head of the Jewish Agency, proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. This wasn't just a declaration of a new country, it was the realization of a centuries-old dream for the Jewish people, a homeland where they could live free from persecution. But this birth was not without its pains. As the last British troops withdrew, ending their mandate in Palestine, neighboring Arab states saw this as a blatant disregard of Arab rights to the land. Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, and Syria, among others, refused to recognize the newly formed state. They declared war, marking the beginning of the First Arab-Israeli War, a conflict that would not only shape the destiny of Israel but also the entire Middle East. Israel, against all odds, managed to hold its ground. The war ended in 1949 with a series of armistice agreements, but the cost was high, thousands of lives were lost, and the map of the region was redrawn. Israel had expanded its borders beyond those proposed in the UN Partition Plan, and the West Bank and Gaza Strip fell under Jordanian and Egyptian control, respectively. However, one of the most significant and enduring consequences of this war was the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, who either fled or were expelled from their homes during the conflict. This exodus, known as the Nakba or catastrophe in Arabic, created a massive refugee problem that remains unresolved to this day. The birth of Israel and the First Arab-Israeli War set a precedent for the region. It showed that the struggle for land, identity, and self-determination could not be easily resolved. It marked the start of a series of wars, conflicts, and peace processes that would continue to shape the political and social landscape of the Middle East. 1948 marked the beginning of a series of wars and conflicts that would define the region. 1967, a war that lasted 6 days, but its impact half a century and counting. In the backdrop of escalating tensions and territorial disputes, the Six-Day War erupted, a conflict that was brief, yet its reverberations are still felt today. The causes of the Six-Day War can be traced back to the unresolved issues of the Arab-Israeli conflict. The immediate trigger, however, was Egypt's decision to close the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping in May 1967. This act was perceived by Israel as an existential threat, leading them to launch a preemptive strike on June 5, 1967. The Six-Day War saw Israel face off against the combined forces of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. Despite being outnumbered, Israel's well-prepared troops and superior tactics turned the tide in their favor. In a blitzkrieg of air and ground assaults, Israel managed to seize control of the Gaza Strip and Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. All this in a mere 6 days. With the dust of the war settling, the map of the Middle East was dramatically redrawn. Israel's territorial gains were significant, but they came at a cost. The occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip brought about 1 million Palestinians under Israeli control. This marked the beginning of a complex and contentious period of occupation, which has been marked by resistance, negotiation, and conflict ever since. The outcomes of the Six-Day War also triggered a seismic shift in the geopolitical landscape. The war fundamentally altered the Arab world's perception of Israel, transforming it from a vulnerable nascent state into a regional military power. This new reality set the stage for future peace negotiations, but also hardened the lines of conflict, setting the stage for decades of strife. With new territories under its control, Israel's occupation sparked international debate. The Six-Day War was a pivotal moment in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict, a moment that continues to shape the dynamics of the Middle East. It's a testament to the lasting impact of those 6 days in 1967. 1993, a glimmer of hope, a chance for peace, the Oslo Accords. The early 90s brought a sense of optimism as secret negotiations between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, began in Norway. These discussions aimed to establish a framework that would lead to the resolution of the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The negotiations were a delicate dance, with both sides seeking to secure their interests while fostering an environment conducive to peace. The discussions culminated in the Oslo Accords, signed in Washington, D.C. in 1993. This agreement had a simple yet profound goal: to establish mutual recognition between Israel and the PLO, and to lay the groundwork for further negotiations towards a two-state solution. Under the Accords, Palestinians would gain self-rule in Gaza and the West Bank in exchange for recognizing Israel's right to exist and renouncing violence. It was a courageous step towards peace, with both sides making significant concessions for the first time. However, the path to peace is often rocky. Despite the initial optimism, the Oslo Accords met with considerable opposition. Critics on both sides argued that the accords were too vague, that they didn't address key issues like the status of Jerusalem, the rights of Palestinian refugees, and the borders of a future Palestinian state. Moreover, the accords were undermined by a series of tragic events. The assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1995 by a Jewish extremist was a severe blow to the peace process, and violence was still a grim reality, with terrorist attacks on both sides further eroding trust. By 2000, the Oslo Accords had effectively fallen apart. The reasons were manifold: the lack of clear guidelines for final status negotiations, the continued expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, and the failure to establish a Palestinian state, among others. The road to peace proved elusive as violence erupted once again. Despite the promise of the Oslo Accords, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict continued. highlighting the complexities and challenges that lie in the pursuit of peace in this region. Turn of the millennium, new century, old conflicts, the Second Intifada and the Gaza conflict. As the year 2000 dawned, it brought with it a resurgence of tensions between Israelis and Palestinians. This flaring up of hostilities is known as the Second Intifada, a period marked by intense violence and bloodshed. The trigger, many believe, was the controversial visit of Ariel Sharon, the leader of Israel's opposition at the time, to the Temple Mount, a site sacred to both Jews and Muslims. In the 5 years that followed, the conflict escalated into a cycle of targeted assassinations, suicide bombings, and military operations, causing widespread destruction and loss of life. The Second Intifada was a grim testament to the deep-seated animosity between the two sides, with civilians caught in the crossfire. The Gaza Strip, a small piece of land on the Mediterranean coast, was a focal point of this conflict. In 2005, in a move that was as controversial as it was surprising, the Israeli government decided to unilaterally withdraw from the Gaza Strip. This move, known as the disengagement plan, saw the evacuation of Israeli settlements and the redeployment of troops. It was hoped that this would pave the way for peace, but the opposite happened. The withdrawal was followed by a power struggle in Gaza between various Palestinian factions, eventually leading to the takeover by Hamas, a group considered a terrorist organization by many countries. The impact on civilians on both sides was devastating. Thousands lost their lives, many more were injured, and countless others were displaced. The physical and psychological scars ran deep, and the infrastructure in many areas was left shattered. The Second Intifada and the Gaza conflict were stark reminders of the complexity and volatility of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They underscored the deep divisions and the seemingly insurmountable challenges to peace. As the dust settled, the conflict had taken a heavy toll, and peace seemed further away than ever. Fast forward to the present day, where the echoes of history continue to reverberate. We've journeyed through a century of conflict, and now we find ourselves in the contemporary period stretching from 2005 to 2023. In this era, the Israel-Palestine conflict remains in a state of flux. The status of Jerusalem, a city sacred to three of the world's major religions, continues to be a point of contention. Despite international law declaring East Jerusalem as occupied Palestinian territory, Israel proclaimed the entire city as its capital in 1980. This move has been met with international criticism and protests, further fueling the conflict. The issue of Israeli settlements has also been a significant factor in the ongoing discord. Despite international calls for a halt, settlement activity in the West Bank has surged, with Israeli settlers now numbering in the hundreds of thousands. These settlements are seen by many as a major obstacle to peace, as they encroach on land envisioned for a future Palestinian state. In the shadow of these persistent issues, the region has also witnessed periods of escalated conflict. The Gaza wars of 2008, 2012, and 2014 resulted in significant loss of life and infrastructure. More recently, in 2021, another round of hostilities erupted, underscoring the volatility of the situation. Yet, amidst the turmoil, there are voices of hope. Movements for peace persist both within and outside the region, working tirelessly toward a solution that acknowledges the rights of all people living in this land. As we step into the present day, we witness a conflict that is fraught with complexities, shaped by a long and turbulent history. The path to peace is a challenging one, but the hope for a resolution endures. Today, the Israel-Palestine conflict remains one of the most complex and enduring disputes in the world. From a letter in 1917 to the headlines of 2023, the Israel-Palestine conflict continues to shape the history of the Middle East. We've journeyed through a century of tension and turmoil, from the Balfour Declaration to the birth of Israel, the Six-Day War, the Oslo Accords, and the Second Intifada. Each chapter carries its own weight of historical significance, with reverberations that echo into the present day. The human cost of this conflict has been immense, with casualties on both sides. Lives have been lost, homes destroyed, and generations of children have grown up in the shadow of these events. Yet, amid the turmoil, there remains a relentless quest for peace. Despite the obstacles and setbacks, the hope for a resolution endures. As we delve into the annals of history, we continue to hope for a future where peace prevails. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning.